We are already on Facebook. Okay, so our Zoom platform is already being shared live on our Facebook page. So I hope everyone is already comfortable in their seats. Good morning, everyone. I am John Riquines, and I will be your moderator for this morning. Welcome to our webinar entitled Towards Institutionalizing Policy on Generation Z, Mental Health Protocols, an iGen Hopeful Research Program Extension and Policy Output. This activity is organized to provide an avenue to share institutional best practices from our outside institutions on creating collaborative and effective mental health protocols and programs. This activity is also organized to formally meet with the stakeholders for the crafting of the suicide prevention protocol and other mental health programs, especially in this new normal. This webinar is spearheaded by Benguet State University Institute of Social Research and Development, together with the College of Arts and Sciences, Social Sciences Department, and cooperation with the Office of the Student Services, and in partnership with the Law Enforcement Chaplaincy of Sacramento, United States. And to make this event even more successful, it is but proper to seek the presence of our Creator. Let us bow our head and feel the presence of the Lord as Miss Shania Lukyao lead us in prayer.
Heavenly Father, praise you for this event and your purpose for it. We know that than we ever could have imagined. Even in failed attempts, you blow us away with your faithfulness to provide what we need. Our prayer today is that your will be done through this event. Take what we have prepared and multiply our efforts as you can. Steer our intentions to align with your righteous will. Remind us your faithful provision when our efforts fail us or fall short. May all glory go up to you when we reach the finish line and climb over benchmarks. Blanket us with your peace today, Father. Keep us physically safe and guard our hearts and minds from pride and selfishness. Keep love at the forefront of our minds today and the guiding light for all we set out to accomplish and celebrate. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Okay. So thank you very much, Ms. Shanya May Lukiao, for leading us in the prayer. We apologize for the short technological glitch that we are encountering right now. But before anything else, we would like to thank the following for participating and taking part of this webinar, starting with the Law Enforcement Chaplaincy of Sacramento, United States, Benga State University, Main Campus, Institute of Social Research and Development, College of Arts and Sciences, Department of Social Sciences, Human Resource Development Office, Office of the Student Services, Master of Arts and Social Studies Students Association, Benga State University Supreme Student Government, Benga State University Student Leaders, Benga State University faculty members and non-teaching personnel. We also would like to extend our gratitude to the University of the Philippines, Baguio, St. Louis University, Department of Education, Cordillera Region, Department of Social Welfare and Development, Cordillera Region, Local Government Unit of La Trinidad and Baguio City. We also recognize the participation of Benguet General Hospital and Medical Center, Sangguniang Kabataan, Benguet Province, the Guidance Program of College of Teacher Education. We also recognize our participants from La Trinidad Benguet, Balibago, Angeles City, Sison, Pangasinan, Luacan, Baguio City, Poblasyon Pinamungahan, Cebu, Poblasyon Tuba Benguet, Balili, La Trinidad Benguet, Hinatuan, Surigao del Sur, Pensao Pilot, Baguio City, Atok, Benguet, Hacienda Lourdes, Barangay 8, Victoria City, Negros Occidental, East Quirino Hill, Baguio City, Cervantes, Ilocosur, Tuba, Benguet, La Trinidad, Benguet, Paraceles, Mari Province, Atok, Benguet, Lagawe, Ifugao, Agoo, La Union, Bawang, La Union, and Baoco Mountain Province. We may not be able to name you all, but from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for joining us this morning. And to begin with, having us today is the BSU Director of the Office of Student Services, Professor Russell Dolendo, to give us a short message and deliver the rationale of this activity.
Gentlemen, to our resource speaker, Mindi Russel, welcome. As mental health issues of the I generation are increasing, coupled with effects of the pandemic, students of Benguet State University are already feeling the brunt of this new phenomenon. Before the pandemic, research results from the iGen Hopeful Research Program show that higher education students are experiencing a lot of social-psychological issues. During the pandemic, cases of suicides are rising, and so there is an urgency to address such kind of issues. Here are some among the key findings of the two researches. The results were gathered before the pandemic. Major social psychological vulnerabilities shared by both sexes were issues on bullying, 2. Acceptance versus rejection, social comparison and unrealistic expectations, 3. Feeling of loneliness and anxiety, 4. Suicide attempts and ideation, and 5. Dysfunctional family setups. Another gender issue raised was on sexual harassment and teenage pregnancy for women and physical abuse for men. Other issues raised for both genders were on facing economic challenges, health issues, dealing with pressures and expectations, and peer pressures. Notable results show that mental health needs of iGeneration is very apparent, especially in terms of their anxiety level, where majority of respondents were under severe to extremely severe level. What is alarming is that almost half of the respondents admitted to engaging in self-harming behaviors. Also, around 7% of the respondents admitted having attempted suicide. On the other hand, only 10% of the surveyed respondents were seeking professional mental health care. For the respondents, the main source of social support, family and friends, are the topmost support, followed by school and relatives. Only a few identified religious and community groups as a sort of social support. Also, life skills on communication and interpersonal skills, creative and critical thinking, and decision-making skills are the top 3 sets of skills identified as priority. On the other hand, resiliency factors were seen in social support, engagement in sports and the arts, 3. Engagement in spirituality, 4. Engagement leadership activities, 5. Engagement in work productive activities, and personal psychological strength. For example, emotional management, goal seeking, grit, and positive thinking. It is envisioned that organizing virtual avenues for collaboration and sharing of best practices would help key stakeholders in Benguet State University and the community as a whole to come up with feasible protocols and policies to address the need of this vulnerable young generation. Hence, with the advocacy of the Institute of Research and Development, or ICERD, to preserve life and well-being, as well to support the Sustainable Development Goals on good health and well-being, led to the conceptualization of this webinar on mental health awareness. This activity is in collaboration with the College of Arts and Sciences, Department of Social Sciences. We also have the Human Resource Development Office of the University. And from the Office of Student Services, we have the Guidance and Counseling Unit. The main goal of this webinar is to increase awareness and understanding on the different mental health issues and available support mechanisms through the presentation of research results on mental health. This activity is not only timely, but it also particularly necessary, especially at this time of pandemic where everyone is still adapting to the new normal caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. So enjoy the rest of the activity, and I hope you would be learning something from this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dolendo, for that message. For now, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to remind everyone, especially to our participants who are watching through our Facebook Live, let us keep a healthy conversation and interaction through our chosen platforms. For those who wanted to raise questions or clarifications during the discussion, you can write your questions in the comment section of our Facebook Live. While to our participants who are with us through Zoom, you can simply type it on your chat box, and assigned individuals will be noting them down and will be answered by our resource speaker during the open forum later on. Moving on to the main event of this activity, I would like to welcome Professor Karil Mayangina, the leader of the Aizen Hopeful Research Program, to introduce us the resource speaker for this morning.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Ma'am Mindi Russel, who I met just before the pandemic under a training sponsored by Vanderpool. So let me introduce her. She is the Executive Director of the Law Enforcement Chaplaincy Sacramento LECS since 1994, and she oversees 100 volunteer chaplains who serve 17 law enforcement agencies, 16 school districts, and the Greater Sacramento region community members. So, as a career law enforcement chaplain, she has implemented many programs, both reactive and proactive, that provide prevention up through post prevention education locally, nationally, and internationally. She has received federal grants from the Office of Traffic Safety and United States Department of Justice. She is proud of creating the first responder churches and church security programs. Okay. So some interesting facts about her. She has been married for 50 years. Sorry, 50 years to Sir Frank. Okay. They served together with John. Okay. For her professional credentials, she is a post-trauma stress specialist, national concerns of police survivors speaker, certified suicide awareness prevention intervention and postvention instructor, United States Department of Justice Victims of Crime Advisor, and POST certified instructor and SME consultant. She has been awarded in 2002 as a National Crime Victim Service Award from President George W. Bush and Attorney General John Ashcroft. This prestigious award is the highest federal honor for victim advocacy and was given by serving as a ground zero on September 11, 2001. She has also been awarded in 2010 with the John Price Chaplain of the Year Award, and in 2019, the California State Resolution from Senator Ted Gaines. And some additional facts about Ma'am Hindi. She is also a national disaster responder and work with first responders and victims. Example like Ground Zero, Sandy Hook Elementary School teams, and responder teams for Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Matthew in Haiti. In 2017, she assisted with the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history at Las Vegas, as well as several of the California wildfires, including a 16-day deployment to the campfire. She wrote Line of Duty Deaths Officer Funeral Eulogies for Governor Schwarzenegger. She is an active board member of Code 9 Project, and she implemented a new statewide chaplains program known as California Chaplains Corps. So without further ado, we give the floor to Ma'am Mindy and welcome virtually to Benguet State University.
Thank you so much. I'd like to be able to now share my screen so we can talk as we go along with this training about suicide prevention. Does everybody have it? All right. So my heart really is driven to helping people that are suicidal. And so this class is about suicide prevention. The emphasis is on intervention, how you and I can help people that may be thinking about dying by suicide. And then of course, how do we help people, the family, the survivors of a family member that has died by suicide. And notice I'm saying died by suicide. They have actually asked us, family members of someone that has died by suicide, to not say committed suicide. And that is because it sounds like they've committed a crime. And you know, and I know that that is not the case at all. They have felt that hopelessness. So we're going to talk a little bit about suicide awareness and suicide prevention. And the first thing that I always ask my class is your point of view. What is your thoughts about suicide, from your culture to the way you were brought up personally, to your exposure to suicide, maybe a family member, a friend, or someone famous that you really connected with? What are your thoughts as far as your religious base? So all of these things are really important. Some of the things that you see here, that suicide is wrong. People have the right to suicide. Person who die by suicide are responsible for their actions. There are limits or boundaries to what I would do to prevent suicide. Persons thinking about suicide also have reasons for living. These are some thoughts that people have shared with me, but I wonder what your thought is and how are you going to be able to work through that if you come across someone that decides they would like to share with you that they are thinking suicide. How are you going to help them? And I want this class to assure you that every one of us can help people. So these best practices are, first of all, is self-awareness, self-analyzing ourselves and understanding we are all a part of our experiences and everything that surrounds us to make us who we are. But when we go into understanding what suicide is, the meaning of suicide, these are some of the suicide behaviors and definitions of what suicide behavior is about. So there is the suicide attempt with injuries, suicide attempt without injuries. Now, a lot of these things that people have done is actually demonstrated that they want to die by suicide. And then there is also, not only with suicide attempts, there's that passive suicide behavior when they don't take on an action necessarily, but they do certain things. Their lifestyle demonstrates that they have literally given up and don't want to live anymore. And that could be something like being reckless or driving fast without regard of life, those self-destructive things that people have done. The suicide threat is verbal or it can be nonverbal, stopping short of directly harming oneself. And so this is one that it could occur in the near future, or it could just be a cry for help. And who are the ones that are going to assess that? Well, if you have, and listen to this word, if you have the privilege of having somebody reach out to you and tell you that they are feeling that hopeless, that they don't want to live anymore, why I call it a privilege is because in that moment of time, you could be the hope that changes their mind, that could help them get back into focus, that there's more to life than what they're looking at right at this time. Engaging in suicide-related behavior, and we're going to talk a little bit about that and how that looks when we are working with someone. Best practices, I think the next thing that we really need to do is understand that there are a lot of myths out there that we have actually believed. We agree with it or we believe it. We don't challenge these myths. And so we basically have accepted that as truth. I've heard that it's said that if somebody says a lie enough times, that it becomes truth in their own mind. So let's talk about some of these myths versus truths and how we need to really start working and being a part of the solution. So the first myth says asking someone about suicide will cause him to become suicidal. And honestly, I cannot tell you how many people believe that that is true, that I'm not going to mention it because I'm afraid that then they'll do it, or I'll give them the idea. But the truth is, when you discuss suicide openly, it helps the suicidal person sort through their problems, actually a sense of relief and understanding. It can be the most helpful thing you can do to someone because you're not denying them and you're not turning away from them. I have heard people that have attempted suicide, that have lived through the suicide attempt, say that the people that were closest to them, family, best friends, were the ones that literally would not engage with them, even when they had this cry of help, thinking suicide. Another myth, depression causes all suicides. That is not true. Now, there is two kinds of depressions. The clinical depression, where a psychiatrist might actually prescribe antidepressive medicines to someone, or someone that has a depression that runs through their family. Now, this is a mental health issue. And we're not talking about that kind of depression, but there are people that have a depressive state of mind. We call it the blues, or maybe you've heard it, that they're really in a funk, or that they just feel like bleh, blah, whatever. Well, all of those kind of comments, and that is a depressive state of mind. It is not a clinical depression. And every one of those kind of depressive state of mind thoughts can be changed by literally a change of scenery, a change of thought, a new focus, goal setting. Millions of people are depressed, and just a fraction of them take their own lives. So we need to recognize and appreciate that. The next one is that there's nothing you can really do if someone is suicidal. You can't stop them. Well, that in itself is not true as well. The people who are suicidal really don't want to die. Let me say that again. People that want or have expressed it that they want to die by suicide actually do not want to die. They just want to stop hurting. They just want to stop being in the life that they're living right now. And we're seeing the increase in youth suicide for this very reason. They feel hopeless. They don't see a future beyond this day by day COVID-19 impression. And so they want to stop the hurt. They don't see beyond this blackness in front of them. The understanding and support and hope that you offer can be the most lifeline that they have. People who die from suicide don't warn others. Out of 10 people who have died by suicide, let their intentions be known. All people give certain kind of clues, cues, or warnings. And I'll show you little down this as a sign of some warning signs. Now, when you're talking to a survivor, a family member, or best friend who literally will look at you and say, I didn't know, they didn't tell me. A lot of times it's because they didn't see it. They weren't trained. So today, I hope you walk away from this class being more aware of what to look for, what to listen for, and what's not being said. Another myth, telling someone to cheer up usually helps. And that kind of sounds kind of silly, but somebody usually will say something like, you think you've got it bad, look at this person or that person, or they'll try to argue with this person who is in such a mindset that they've got it all together. They're so lucky, that kind of thing. So all of those kind of phrases. I'm sorry, are you trying to talk to me? Okay. So when someone is talking to you and they are actually being very raw in their emotions, we want to make sure that we listen well and we take them seriously. You know, there's an expression when you're in a swimming pool, you are not allowed to yell help, right? Because that could get people thinking you're drowning. Same way with this. We don't take anybody saying that they want to die by suicide as not serious. We want to address it. Another myth is people who complete suicide also leave notes. Now, notice I did not say have a successful suicide. I know that's been a terminology used for many, many years. There's no success in dying by suicide. And so we say completed suicide, attempted suicide, or completed suicide. Most people do not leave notes. Actually, about a third leaves notes. And everyone that has ever left notes has actually created more questions to family members. So it doesn't help the family at all. I have noticed with youth and in youth suicide, and that is up to the age of 24 instead of just 18. And that is because they have recognized that up to 24, our youth are still in college a lot of times. So still with parents' influences. So they will actually say up to 24. And we just know that when they are looking at suicide as a way of escaping, there's something to be said about how their friends can help them. But here we have stigma. Now, the definition of stigma is a mark of disgrace, a stain of reproach on one's reputation. And in certain cultures, it's a stain on the whole family's reputation. Now, look what it says on bullet 2. It says our society does a good job of saddling suicide with stigma. Now, we've got to be really, really careful that we don't fall in the trap of social stigma and prejudice against people that have attempted or completed suicide. But there has been many cultures and religions and people that have been taught from childhood that suicidal people are shameful or sinful or weak or selfish or even manipulators. So this kind of training can become very contagious in our attitudes and the way we look at other people. Stigma, when we can label somebody, it makes us be able to accept it maybe better. He was selfish. She was crazy. Any one of those kind of labels make us not feel like it's our responsibility to help. Suicide is reserved, afflicted by excessive fame, no fame, addictions, crimes. A lot of times our culture drives to these assumptions. Other stigmas are, it's only the hopeless, the out of the home settings like foster children or orphan children, only people that have had traumatic experiences, disabilities, substance abuse, LGBTG, just some of these things. But a lot of people really do believe that that kind of thing can happen to their family. I am surprised at how often parents are so shocked of how much their child, their youth knows about suicide. Anyone that's on the internet can learn how to actually complete suicide successfully. So we want to be able to address this at all ages and really hone in on the fact that it and stigma, the stigma is wrong, and that suicide can happen to anybody, any age, any culture. It is a worldwide pandemic, way before COVID-19 started. Now, my statistics are always the United States, obviously, but you know what? I just got to tell you that any statistic that you have from your country or my country or the national or international suicide organizations, at best, they're conservative and they're never true, not completely true. Reason why? In our country, if there isn't a slight doubt at all that it could be an accident, it is ruled an accident. If there are a lot of suicides that are not classified as suicide because of the fact of the situation or the circumstance around it. And so we just have, at best, conservative numbers and statistics. But even with that, we know we have way, way too many suicides all over the world. So the problem, the scope of the problem, if you would, is the fact that it's a major public health problem. And if you would allow me to address COVID-19, we have a helpline started with the Office of Emergency Services back in March. And we actually answered 24/7 people that were not only in emotional distress, but spiritual distress at the same time. And a lot of people were actually thinking about dying by suicide. Their distress was, why am I here? What's the purpose? You see, life became so different and changed so fast, so drastically, that people weren't able to catch up. It was kind of like like an explosion, and they were just trying to get some way to balance this all out. There were fear of the unknown, fear of the known and not liking it. Life continued on. Babies were born, people were dying, and yet because of the COVID-19, it became, everything became distorted and overwhelming, and people felt very out of control, which again, hopeless. They saw no end to this COVID-19. And depending on what kind of news you listen to, we have a lot of negative news that they're now saying we're not going to get back to any kind of semblance of what we used to be until 1922. Now, if somebody's already distressed or feeling like there's hopelessness and they don't know even what to go on, that could really push them to start thinking more and more about suicide. So any of these things, we can honestly say these are minimal or the most conservative. And what we know is by taking a training, by practicing best practices, we can make a difference. And that's all we want to do anyway, right? We want to be that helpline, that lifeline, that hope line. We are going to be the first line of defense against suicide. We want you to learn how to detect people that are saying things or maybe not saying things, and that they're leading you down to ask that question. You're going to be able to assess, are they just thinking it, or do they actually have a plan? And this is way beyond how you can help. And we're going to be able to know we have the confidence and we're empowered by being equipped to provide emotional first aid. Dramatically reducing the risk that someone you encounter in the course of your duties or association will attempt or die by suicide. We want to be those. We want to be the first line of defense against suicide. We need to be able to realize we all have a responsibility in this. We all can be a part, a major part, in helping someone else. This training, we have 3 jobs. This is not the people that are suicidal because of their mental illness. It's not that kind of training. And it's not the kind of training for suicidal people because of the chronic, uncontrolled pain. Patients that are almost out of their mind because of the extreme pain and no relief that they have. This suicide awareness training is for the yous and for the me's. It's to be able to help you prevent your own suicide, prevent the suicide of a coworker or a student, and prevent the suicide of someone in your community, your family, your friends, your neighbors, your church members. For those of us that work with first line responders and those that you have sworn to protect and serve. This class that I'm teaching you, I teach law enforcement. In that profession, we see way too many suicides. Here's a big concern that I have in regards to our health system. Now, you all might have a very strong health system in this area. Our mental health system is pretty broken. And we have these kind of stats to demonstrate it. In the month before the death by suicide, half saw a general practitioner and 30% saw a mental health professional. They've fallen through the cracks. Also, in the 60 days before their death by suicide, 10% were seen in the emergency department. A best practice that's just started last July 2019, is that in every emergency room when a patient comes in, they're asked by the triage nurse, have they thoughts of suicide? Wonderful. Up until 2019, that was never asked. And when someone goes to their family physician or a general practitioner, that's also on their form that they fill out every time they go and see. Have you thoughts of suicide? You know, and I think it's really one of the things that has changed because they're now addressing it instead of falling into that stigma and that myth. I can't ask that because maybe they'll get the idea. You know, a lot of times we blame the mental health system and the professionals, but the fact is there is so many people falling through the cracks because they are not going to get the help that they need. So it's a kind of a catch-22, isn't it? So the next slide that I have here is why suicide prevention matters. And you know, when I'm looking at the fact that we usually have minimum of 1 suicide a week, and sometimes we have up to 3 suicides a week just with children under the ages of 24. Each week, way too many. But have you ever thought that suicide is a form of violence? Now, when I teach that, so many people are surprised, taken back. Some told me that was very offensive that we would call suicide a form of violence. But it is. Violence in the way that you take your own life, you stop existing by means of some type of weapon. It's not necessarily has to be a gun, a rope, a knife, a vehicle, all kinds of forms to stop you existing. It's violence. And it's violence towards others and violence towards self, shared causes. You know, the violence that suicide causes their family and their friends after the fact, the violence causes stress, causes critical incidents, causes so much trauma, grief to those that are left behind. So this course is primarily about preventing violence towards self and how to reduce those expression of violence in our community. You know, anybody that jokes about suicide needs to realize it's no laughing matter. It hurts down to your very, very soul when someone you love has committed suicide, died by suicide. So here are some of the warning signs you think about when you're looking at that and you're going, you know, making suicide threats, well, that kind of is a no-brainer. But giving things away, a lot of times people don't even know that someone's giving things away. They don't make a big deal out of it. I had one person that gave his dog away, had a great excuse. He shared that he couldn't take care of the dog well anymore. Why would you even question that? You love the dog, you accept the dog, that's great. But unbeknownst to you, while he's giving his favorite dog away to you, he might be giving his CDs away to someone else or giving his car away. Well, nobody ever talks about, you know what Fred just gave me? It's just something nobody talks about until the funeral. And then they beat themselves up because I should have known. Why would you know that? People give things away all the time. Making funeral arrangements, that's not by itself a suicide warning sign. But when you gather several of these signs together, then it becomes something to look at as a warning. When we talk about engaging in risky behaviors, that's a passive way for people that are thinking suicide and attempting it. Again, like I said, driving really fast, putting yourself in risky situations. Now, this one self-harm like cutting behaviors, and that is on every suicide task force I've ever been on. We have 50% believe that that is a way of leading up to suicide, and 50% do not believe that. Talking with people that have self-harmed themselves, cut themselves, disemboweled themselves, have said that they didn't want to die. They were doing these cuttings because that would take the hurt from their heart and their mind. It would distract them. So again, we really have to be careful that one of these signs are not necessarily suicidal, but when you get 2 and 3 and 4 of them, then it's time to really start addressing it. Talking frequently about death. In what context? There are people that talk about death because a lot of their family members have died, or maybe that they have, you know, a profession that deals with death a lot. We as chaplains, we do all the death notifications in the Sacramento County area. So think about that. When you make 500 death notifications, you're talking about death a lot. Drastic mood change in behavior, unless you know that person very well, you would not even recognize that. Feeling a burden to others, now that's usually an expression that is a feeling that they have because of sickness or age or something that they have lost hope with. Possessing lethal means, people, we all possess lethal means. We can go into our medicine cabinet, we can go into our kitchen, we can get into our car. It doesn't necessarily have to be a gun to have a lethal means. I had a 7-year-old die by suicide by hanging from his garage with a belt. So we all possess lethal means. What are we doing with them though? Aggressiveness and irritability. Now that can be burnout. That can be compassion fatigue, or with a combination of many of these other signs. It could be that they are actually demonstrating their hopelessness, feeling out of control in the area of that secondary emotion, which is aggressiveness, irritability, anger, which actually pushes people away. And you don't ask questions like, what's going on? Isolation or feeling alone. That's where we will talk about some of the positive factors when you don't have a social group, when you don't have family and friends. That is an isolated feeling because, you know, many of us have experienced feeling alone in a crowd. It begins when you withdraw, you isolate, and you literally become very apathetic to your surroundings. And the very top one, a sense of hopelessness or no hope for the future. Honestly, hopelessness, you'll find as we continue on our discussion, that hopelessness is the thing that is the funnel of everything that can create and trigger us to start thinking about suicide. It all ends into hopelessness. Now, because we don't have much time, this is just kind of to basically re-emphasize what we just talked about with the warning signs, but talking about it, seeking lethal means no future, self-loathing, getting affairs in order, saying goodbye, withdrawing, self-destructive behavior, and then suddenly a sense of calm. And why would that be? Is because after the depression, people kind of on alert that something's wrong. They have literally made a decision, and we'll talk about the plan. So real quick, because I really want to talk about intervention here, and I only have another hour with you. So let me quickly share with you a couple more things here. The suicide desire, feeling hopeless, feeling helpless, feeling a burden on others. This is where they are in this big gray field where we can actually help people, you and me, that they don't want to die, but they just don't know how to get out of the hurt. How do they get out of this feeling of no purpose, that kind of thing. So this is where we have such a strength in just being with this person and knowing how to help them. Again, as it gets a little further into not only a suicide desire, but also the capability. That second bullet point, overcoming the will to live. When someone has gotten to that point and crossed over that will to live, it will take a miracle for them to change their mind because they have literally mentally died. So remember that one. And then suicide attempt, that is if you are with somebody that has a plan, that has the weapon, has the explanation why they're going to do it, that's when we need to realize this is more than just talking to someone. So really, you've got to estimate, if you would, estimate the suicide risk in someone. Best practices, we know in general, suicide risk is low to moderate when few risk factors are present and several or many protective factors are present. Now, that's not for you to know. That's for them to own. It's not for you to know. It's for them to know. And then the suicide risk is high when many risk factors are present and no protective factors are there. So when I'm talking about a lethality scale, the plan, the 0 to 1 is the suicide thoughts. That is at the lowest risk of dying by suicide. Many people can be talked through and it stops there. But if you ask somebody who says, you know, I just don't want to live anymore, you're going to have to ask that hard question. What does that mean? You don't want to live anymore? Are you thinking about dying by suicide? And if they say yes, then the next questions are, how would you do it? That's getting higher in the risk of how and if they would do it. 6 to 7, higher risk. Where would you do it? Their plan is becoming more in detail. And then 8 to 10, when would you do it? That is the decision. Many times they have crossed over that line of the will to live. They have a plan in place. It's going to take a lot to change their mind. And that is where we basically don't want to, I'm sorry, I didn't keep up with myself here. That's where we need desperately, quickly, we have a 911 system that we would call immediately to get help. The next one, the next slide is the lethal triad. So now we have the suicidal lethality scale, but the lethal triad is when these three things are present: an upset, depressed, a hopeless person, and alcohol with a weapon. Doesn't have to be a firearm. Again, remember I said there's a lot of weapons we have in our own house, right? But when these three are present and they have a plan, the risk of violence is high. And when we say alcohol, they say 60 to 70% of the people that have died by suicide had been drinking before they died. Now here's one for the youth. Now I know that I'm addressing a police officer, but there is sleep deprivation can affect all of us. And what this basically is talking about, and teenagers are really bad at this. They don't get enough sleep. We know that our teenagers need a minimum of 10 to 12 hours of sleep, but they go to bed with their phones, as many of us do, and they might only get 4 to 5 hours of sleep. So they're always walking around tired, right? Well, it's called the effects of sleep deprivation. They have impaired connotation. They are not able to ability to process information. Can you imagine going to school, or now with them, many of them online, being able to process information? It increases, listen to this, the effects of sleep deprivation. It increases the levels of anxiety. It makes the reaction and the overall effect of anxiety higher, increased. Stroke risk. When you sleep 6 hours or less a night, your chance of a stroke increases 4 times. We are seeing teenagers, youth, having strokes at a huge amount. Why? When we go back down to many of analyzing why a teenager died by suicide, many are because of the effect of that sleep deprivation. It increases the risk for diabetes. It increases the risk of depression because of course, it disrupts the brain that regulates mood, right? And increases risk of cancer, risk of heart disease. And it actually will, sleep deprivation, have you gain weight, because when we sleep, it helps balance our hormones that make us feel hungry or full. These are amazing informations. So sleep deprivation on the very bottom says can be dangerous. Absolutely. So what are some of the buffers against suicide? Well, the connections and promises of future, social supports, planning for the future, positivity, helpful, buffers of uncertainty for living and dying, addressing that, core values and beliefs, and sense of purpose in life. The ability to establish a helping relationship with a suicidal person can be a buffer against suicide for that person. And as we were introduced today with the chancellor, these are the protective factors. These are the things that we have studied to see that this is why it is so important that it overrides the risk factors when we have protective factors. So if you see that balance wheel, and the wheel of life is a very balanced way, positive self-image. Again, if you're going to ever deal with teenagers and youth, they don't have a good self-image. Personal resilience, that is something that can be trained for all ages. Personal coping skills, supportive family, strong friendships, active in the community, belief that it's okay to ask for help, and then positive spiritual beliefs. These are all protective factors that help people stay strong and stay focused instead of giving up and feeling a sense of hopelessness. It's, you know, when we can start helping people, really they are the ones that have to tell you what are their protective factors that are working even in their hopelessness. And hopefully if they can give you a couple of these things, that is really where we can work with them to see that their life is worth and valuable and that they can kind of refocus. So here's the one that I believe is so important: suicide intervention. You know, it is difficult to talk about suicide, but it's necessary. If we're going to be a part of our mental health profession, we absolutely need to be able to do this in a comfort zone. You know, we do death notifications. I don't know if you've ever had to do a death notification, and some people say, oh, that's terrible. No, it is life-changing to the person we're giving the message, but we would much rather do it in person than they hear it on the phone or through a Facebook page or however else somebody would give them that sad, life-changing news. But being able to talk to someone about suicide is not life-changing, it's life-saving. You can save lives by being empowered and equipped to do it, to directly talking and helping someone. It's unacceptable in a lot of cultures. It's unacceptable in a lot of people's homes. So that suicidal person, if they are talking to you, reaching out to you, you are, number one, a hope that they've lost for a moment, and you're not rejecting them. You are not addressing things that they are afraid of, like taboos and stigma and fear and ignorance. We have a role to play. So how do we start a conversation about suicide? Now, I'm going to encourage every one of you to always stay in your lane. If you're not comfortable talking the way I'm going to give you some suggestions, then don't say it that way. Put in your own words. But talking to a friend or a family member about their suicidal thoughts and feelings can be difficult. And you might say, well, what if they're not? You have to understand something. We're talking to one another. I'm talking to you, you're listening without any emotion, without thoughts of suicide. And yet, when we are talking to someone that's thinking suicide, they are not offended by you saying, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about dying by suicide? They are not offended by that. And if you do ask somebody and you say, are you thinking about dying by suicide? And they're not, they'll clearly say it. Oh no, I wasn't thinking that. I'm tired of the world, but I wouldn't do anything. So this is what you've got to get over, not them. You've got to get over, because they will answer you because you're going to help them. So the best way to find out if somebody is suicidal, there you go. Ask them. You can't make a person suicidal by showing that you care. Please hear that. You can't make someone suicidal by showing that you care. In fact, you're giving that person who's maybe thinking suicide an opportunity to express his or her feelings, and it can prevent them from feeling lonely and feeling negative, and maybe even stopping their suicide attempt. So, questions you can ask to start a conversation. Now, obviously, it's going to be if you know this person, or even if you don't know this person, it's a conversation. One, you know what? I've been feeling concerned about you lately. Now, that is showing concern. That's not asking if they're going to die by suicide. It's just, I've been feeling concerned about you lately. What's going on? You know, we all walk around and our expression is, how are you? And people will say, fine, or I'm good, you know, and most of the time we say those questions, how are you? Never expecting somebody to answer that question. So you've got to turn these questions around and not start that way. I've been feeling concerned about you. What's going on? Do you want to talk about it? Recently, I've known you've had some differences in you. So I'm checking in on you. I love the word, hey, I'm calling you because I'm checking in. That is so different than, how are you? You know, it could be even something to start the conversation by something like, you know, you haven't been yourself for a while. Can I ask what's going on? And what you say that helps if they continue the conversation. Now, you've already demonstrated you've got time for them. And they might be saying something like, yeah, life really is terrible right now, or something like that. Become a great listener. Don't assume anything. Literally, when did you start feeling this way? Or how does something like this make you start feeling this way? You've got to find their story. Let them tell their story. Here's a great question. They might start, you ask them the question, are you thinking suicide? No, I don't think I'm that bad yet. Well, then how can I best support you? How can I best support you? Have you thought about getting help? And then if you ask that question, do you know some locations, resources to get somebody help? And if you don't, you know what? Start finding that out. Have in your smartphone or your book, or however you keep notes, have places that you would be able to give a reference or referral or a resource. It really does. It really will help people when you say things like, thank you for talking to me about this. Let's talk some more. You're not alone in this. I am here for you. They have reached out to you. They shouldn't have to reach out a second time. Now it's on you. You may not believe it now, but the way you're feeling will change. I may not be able to understand what you're going through, but I care about you and I want to help. You see, people, cliches, those phrases that we use because we don't know what else to say, don't work for people, especially when they're traumatized or they are suicidal. We need to be real with them. We need to say truth. Truth, like, I'm here for you. Thank you for reaching out. We can do this together. I don't know how you feel. None of us know how anybody feels, ever. So we never say that as a statement. I know exactly how you feel. No, you don't. Never. So I don't know how you feel, but I want to help you. And then when you feel like you're going to give up, just stop and tell yourself to hold on for another second, another minute, another breath. You're going to make it. And I'm here to help you. You see what a difference, a much more strong way of helping somebody instead of, I don't know what to do. And then the next phrase is even more of how we can help people. Suicide conversation, the important do's and don'ts. I think the slogan, "You are not alone," is so important to understand. And I'll tell you why. Again, I've worked with a lot of people that have attempted suicide and have recovered. They, for whatever reason, by the grace of God, we know that, they didn't die, and then they were changed. But all of them said that when they got to that point where they were so overwhelmed and that all they were thinking is about dying by suicide, they felt so alone that they didn't have anybody, not their family, not their friends, to help them. And so we've got to be able to recognize this is a great expression. And remember, showing somebody you care is so much more important than trying to come up with the right words. There's an expression, people won't remember what you said to them. People won't remember what you did for them. People will remember how you made them feel. When you are there and they know they're not alone, that is amazing. So some of the things to do to help someone in a conversation of suicide is simply be yourself. Let that person know you care. They're not alone. Listen, listen, listen. Let that person unload their despair, vent their anger, no matter how much the conversation seems negative. That in itself is positive because they're getting all that garbage out. Be sympathetic. Do not be judgmental. Be patient, calm, accepting. Don't interrupt. Just listen. Let them say whatever. You are not agreeing with them. You're validating where they are at this time. And then offer hope. Really, truly, you being there is their hope. Reassure that that person can get help and you're going to help them. And this feeling of suicide is temporary. And let them know that right then, in that moment, they are important to you. You see, we can't count on the fact that they've got a great family, a great dog, a great job. We can't count on any of that being that grounding for them. What you can count on is you are right there in the moment. You are the grounding component of hope. If the person says things like, "I'm so depressed, I can't go on," you are going to ask that question. Are you thinking suicide? You're not putting ideas in their head. You're showing your concern and that you're taking them seriously. And it's okay to share their pain with you. So here are some of the don'ts. Please don't argue with that person. Please avoid saying things like, "Well, you've got so much to live for. Your suicide will hurt your family. Look at the bright side." You know, all of those things do not matter when you have given up hope. Do not act shocked or lecture them on the value of life. What would God say? Or suicide is wrong. I don't care how you really feel right this moment in your own ways. You are there to help that person get through it. Don't promise confidentiality. And why I say that is because you don't have the right to keep that as a secret. You cannot swear that you're not going to share. You need to get them help. I'd rather somebody be mad at me than dead because of me. So you need to recognize that you will keep their confidence, which means that you're not going to tell it to everybody that you know. But as far as confidential, this is beyond you, and they need help. Offer ways to fix their problems. Don't do it. Don't fix them. Don't take on their burdens. Don't give them advice. Don't make them feel like they've got to justify their suicide feelings. It's not how bad a problem is. It's how badly they're hurting. And then don't blame yourself. You're not going to fix anybody's depression or hopelessness. Your loved one's happiness or lack thereof is really not your responsibility. What is your responsibility is get them help. What is your responsibility is to listen to them and help them. So going on to the next slide, be emotionally present. And that is exactly what that means. That it's not always easy to be there emotionally when someone is talking about suicide, but to be able to be there, be with that suicide person, it is something that we gift to someone else. To be with a loved one that has experienced someone that has died by suicide is a gift. And we learn to do that gift by just doing it. The next one we want to do to help is be accurate in your empathy, in sync, on the same wavelength with someone. It means accurately sense what that suicidal person is experiencing so that they can communicate their world as best as they can. Accurate empathy is the most effective and most powerful. It is not feeling their pain. It is not walking in their shoes. It is not getting into their space. It is really listening, connecting, and letting them know you care. And then here's another one to be genuine. Genuine really is easy if you're just yourself. You don't have to be a phony. And the best way to be helpful to those in distress is to be self-aware and know who you are and how you can help someone. The next one is giving them unconditional positive regard. Now, this gets into a little bit more of how we should give each other respect, even if we don't agree with suicide. This is an attitude, and it is the most tried and tested way to be a helpful person. First responders wouldn't be first responders if they did not have and possess an unconditional positive regard. They are unconditionally able to help someone without judging them or minimizing them, with a professional and a caring attitude, and we can have that. And listening, in every study, everything you're ever going to do when you are going to be a helper to others is you will be taught over and over again, encouraged over and over again, active listening. Listening is the greatest gift one human can give to another. Advice tends to be easy, quick, cheap, and often wrong. Your advice may not work for them, even though it worked for you. Listening takes time. You have to slow down. Patience and courage, but that's always right. And active listening is paying very close attention to what the person is speaking about while trying to understand their feelings. It's a proven skill. It's invaluable to suicidal people and that those who have lost someone to suicide. And listen is spelled Listen, is the same letters that spell S-I-L-E and T silent, same letters arranged differently. So active listening, let them tell their story. Active listening lets somebody help somebody be their own hero. You don't need to be somebody's hero in their story. Let them be their own hero. And then, with active listening, it is literally, we're not rushing into judgments. We're not assuming. We're giving undivided time and attention. So giving that to someone is the greatest gift. And many people don't have that. They've never been trained that. Another way that we can help somebody is reflecting. All of us want to be understood. This is especially true for someone that is contemplating suicide, or someone who has grieving the loss of someone who has died by suicide. So reflecting on someone's thoughts or feelings is a way for us to show that we're trying to understand those challenges. So we restate what they've said, not verbatim, but a way that we show that we understand their main thought or feeling. And we never change their memory. We never add to their emotion. So if somebody's saying, I'm upset, you wouldn't change the word to, you're feeling very, very angry. Use the words that are equal to or the same, so that that reflecting is sharing their main thought or feeling and not adding to it. And of course, open-ended questions. Once they tell their story and tell it some more, asking open-ended questions should be really minimal, and it should be just for a clarification or to be able to kind of navigate to going back to something positive instead of the negative. Let's talk a little bit real quick about how we're hardwired. We're hardwired to only think negative. And it says that for every negative thought we have, it takes 10 positive thoughts to overshadow and override it. So you can see how open-ended questions, or even reflecting back to somebody, because if they are thinking about suicide, they're hardwired already to think negative and they're feeling hopeless. So where do we find some positives that we suggest, and then they fill in the blanks? Again, they've got to own their story, not us. Another one that we can do is help them in the problem solving. Now, it's not something that we go out and try to solve their problem, but basically what we're trying to do is work together to generate strategies. You spend some time with this person. They're sharing with you, they really don't want to die. They just want to stop living the way they are. So working through strategies to accomplish goals, to accomplish why they got to this hopeless problem in the first place. Again, they alone must own the solving of the problem. Now, any kind of problem solving follows with a plan of action, and a plan of action can be simple, and that usually works really good. Solving our problems is one way. Now, the plan of action is really dealing with how we're going to solve it. It's action behind the solution. And then the next one is persuasion and resistance. So the goal of persuasion is to use the positive relationship you've built in this conversation and this storytelling, and to be able to accept these life-affirming solutions for their own safety. If the person is persuaded to accept help, even including the help that you've given them, it is another step for them becoming healthy and resilient and being able to be safe in the area of their thoughts. So I wanted to share with you real quick the many paths to suicide. So remember how I told you that it could be biological, genetic load, sex, race, age. It can be personal or psychological, child abuse, loss of parent, cultural shock, values, religious beliefs, drugs or alcohol. It can be environmental, season of the year. Here's another myth. Everybody thinks there's more suicide around the holidays than any time of year. That is not true. Now, a lot of people get depressed and have those blues, but this is not the month that is the highest or peaks out in suicide. You know when? Spring. One of the biggest days is New Year's Day after the holidays. But do you see how every one of those goes to now the proximal risk factor, the final straw, or what we say is the triggers? So all of them are building up, cumulative, possibly. And then there's this crisis in a relationship, or loss of freedom, or fired, expelled, terminated, an illness, a major loss, or I always say X factor, the question mark, something that it matters to that person. Well, it goes right into the increasing hopelessness, that's where the contemplation of suicide as a solution. Now, back in the 80s, there was a campaign, I guess, about suicide, and it says, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Well, suicide should never, ever be a solution. So when you see this next slide, when you see the wall of resistance, let me show that to you real quick. The next page is this. It looks like a brick wall. And the wall of resistance to suicide are those protective factors and buffers against suicide. A good therapist or counselor, duty to others, good health, medication compliance, fear, job security or job skills, responsibility for children, support of significance, others, difficult access to means, a sense of hope, positive self-esteem, pets, religious prohibition, calm environment, AA or NA sponsor, best friends, safety agreement, treatment availability, and then sobriety. These are some of the protective factors and buffers against suicide, because the next one is the cause of death. And those are those weapons that people use. So everything is like a chain that goes into that hopelessness. And on the lower left, it says all causes are real. All causes are real. Hopelessness is the common pathway to suicide. But where we can break the chain anywhere equals prevention. So if you think about someone in any one of those fundamental risk factors, they've got that. Then they have the risk factors that triggers. They've got that. And then that hopelessness. How can we break the chain? So for an example, if somebody is saying how they're going to do it is an overdose of pills, and where they're going to do it is going to be in their bedroom when they go to bed that night, and when that night. If you take the pills away from them, now hear me out. If you take the pills away from them, you have got some time, because people that are in a plan of suicide don't come up with 2 or 3 or 4 different kinds of weapons. They actually have one idea, how, one place, where, and when, one time, that final straw. And that's a very interesting analysis that we have seen over the years studying suicide. Break the chain. How can we break the chain? So going back to that wall of resistance, this is again in our conversation after that person has told you why they want to die, why they feel hopeless, and all of those things. And now we find out that they have some strengths and some positive factors in their life. They have a calm environment. They love their pets. They have a positive self-esteem. Whatever, we build on those in our conversation. So if we were together, we would do some scenarios actually in the area of talking to people, so you could practice. Are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about dying by suicide? What are your thoughts about suicide during this? This is a practice. This is something that you actually have to practice doing, because it's not natural for any of us to ask if somebody wants to die. It's just not a natural question. So that goes into the intervention. And then the next one is postvention. Postvention to me is nothing more than an opportunity to become prevention. If you have the privilege of working with people that have experienced suicide in their family or in their friendships, then it's your opportunity to help them in a very caring way and train them, because it was never their fault. When we have parents just beat themselves up when their youth have killed themselves, they should have seen it. They should have known, that kind of thing. They weren't looking for it. They didn't think that that was even a possibility. So how do you see something you don't ever think is going to happen to your family? But I thought this was a very thought-filled advertisement. Every 40 seconds, somewhere in the world dies by suicide. And every 41 seconds, someone is left to make sense of it. No one ever understands it. The what ifs, the could ifs, the should ifs, the guilt, the blame, just the destruction of people's hearts and lives, again, because of the violence of suicide. The definition of suicide, postvention, is providing crisis intervention, support and assistance for survivors of suicide event. You might ask why we call them survivors of suicide. And that was from about 30 years ago, that families that had experienced suicide in their lives requested that they were not treated as suicide family members. They didn't want to hear the word. They didn't want to see it on mail that came in their mailbox. And so the survivor was the word that was given to them, survivors. And so we have a nonprofit in America called Friends of Survivors. And everybody knows it's a suicide self-help group, but it's not mentioned in the title. A survivor or bereaved is a person who has lost someone. Bereavement is a process of adjusting to a loss, such as death by suicide. And it is a slow process, because the whys sometimes bring people to such a heaviness. It's such a burden. There are so many whys that will never, ever be answered. And then, of course, grief is the physical and emotional and cognitive and spiritual response to actual or threatened loss of a person. Grief can be loss of things, jobs, all kinds of things. But this kind of grief, it actually consumes the person physically, emotionally, cognitively, and spiritually. So how do we respond to friends or family with somebody that has died by suicide? Again, you may have the opportunity to go to somebody's house and they have a lot of stigma that's attached to this suicide. So again, we're able to be there to be a support, and we are able to say those kind of things. I'm sorry for your loss. We don't usually in funerals discuss much about how somebody dies as much as we discuss that they have died. I can't imagine what you're going through. This is candor. This is a true way of how you're feeling, but it's so much nicer than saying, I know how you feel, because you don't. And you never compare somebody's suicide to somebody else's suicide. It doesn't matter, because whoever is in that grief at that moment is absolutely doesn't actually care about anybody else's grief with their suicide. Please know that I am here for you, and then make that happen instead of you just writing out a phone number to them and saying, call me anytime. Again, like I said, people in crisis, people in trauma should never ask for help the second time. So you stay on top of that. Say, I'm here for you, and I'd like to call you again tomorrow at, give a time. You will be in my thoughts and prayers. May be helpful. They might not even be religious, but they're not going to be offended because they see that you're sincere and you are a faith person. So it's okay to say you're in my thoughts and prayers. And we went through a whole time about a year ago, people saying, don't say that. Well, yeah, do say it, because hopefully you are caring about that person. If you have the time and a relationship, you might want to say, would you like to talk about it to me? I'm here to listen. And again, they might be overwhelmed, too overwhelmed to speak. They might want to share. But what they're seeing in you is a person that cares. And isn't that the investment we want to give to people? So I must say that our attitude is critical. Just as there's no illness or injury without an attitude towards it, we need to understand why we would have an attitude that would convey, maybe not in our actions or even in our words, but it would come through, and it makes the situation even worse. So we want to be real careful when we have an attitude that is maybe contrary to what we are there to help that person in. Check the attitude at the door. And then from families or loved ones, you're going to see anger and shame and grief and fear. And if you've got more than 2 people in the room, family related, you're going to have all kinds of ways that they're dealing with it and different. So you want to be able to support the people grieving. And you might have to be a little firm, because if somebody is saying things like, I should have saw it coming, it's my fault, that kind of stuff, firm but gentle in the area of, it wasn't your fault. It's nobody's fault. Statements about being out of control or powerless, betrayal. She said she'd never do this. He promised he never would. You're going to hear all those kind of things. And then the acute suicide warnings, that somebody else might be thinking that they want to die as well. Those comments are, I should just kill myself. He's in a better place. Maybe I should join him. Now, those are usually said when people are grieving and are in such despair by losing someone. But, you can clarify that. You listen, you find out, is it just comments because I can't live without them, that kind of comment? Or are they really actually starting to show and demonstrate they have a plan too? And then for peer or chaplain or mental health, if you're going to be helping people in the worst times of their lives, expect a wide range of strong emotions. Expect that these emotions are going to be in you. You might not have any attachment or connectedness to this family, but you might. And so you need to be able to understand how it's affecting you. Some suicide attempt survivors will be happy with the rescue. if they've lived. Some will be angry with the rescue. So that creates some confusion in our own hearts, especially if we had a part to play in it. Families of suicide attempts and completed suicide often experience suicidal thoughts and feelings. If you interpret a suicide a warning, then you start the QPR, we call it question, persuade, and refer. We want to make sure that we don't leave that and just say, oh, they're just really distraught. We want to make sure we're on top of this. So my friends, my last slide, and I think that we have the opportunity for you all that have sent in a question or two for me to answer. This is the opportunity for me to be with you now and address situations. So I'm gonna take the screen off and come back to everybody to find out if there's anything in the chat room or in questions. Yes, sir. God
Okay.
bless you.
Okay. So thank you very much, Ma'am Mindi Russel, for that very informative sharing. Indeed, suicide is a serious social issue that is sometimes being neglected or poorly addressed in some cases. I agree on that. Suicide prevention and spreading awareness on this matter must be an everybody's concern. Everybody must take an initiative on this. As you have mentioned a while ago, we have three jobs to do. First is to prevent suicide by starting it with ourselves and rippling it to our family, to our relatives, and extend it to our workplaces and beyond. And we must take note that suicide really is a violence, and it does not bring only a threat or danger to oneself, but also the people who are surrounding them. We should discuss this openly, and we should not consider it as a taboo to talk about. And furthermore, we must bear in mind the line, you are not alone. With this, we can bring back the hope within ourselves and to someone else. And while Ma'am Mandy is delivering her discussion, we noted a few questions from our participants here. For this, I am turning over the floor to Miss Angeline Lapus to facilitate the open forum or the question and answer part. Miss Angeline?
Again, good morning, everyone. We are now officially moving on to our open forum. To all our participants, we would like to hear from you. So please do comment your questions in our FB Live comment section. So as of the moment, we have two questions here, Ma'am Mindy. And the first question would be coming from Ma'am Karil Nina. She's asking, how do we strengthen suicide prevention advocacy and institutionalization, especially when there is a belief that death caused by suicide is not statistically significant? Again, let me repeat the question, ma'am. How do we strengthen suicide prevention advocacy and institutionalization, especially when there is a belief that death caused by suicide is not statistically significant?
Well, I think this falls into, again, taboos and stigma when we start seeing that suicide is not statistically significant. We need to, again, continue to teach and reach out to people to show it is significant, that everybody's life matters, and that suicide is the only death that is preventable. So I think changing taboos, changing beliefs, changing stigma is something that we all need to work on to strengthen our suicide prevention programs.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Mindy. For the second question, I have here coming actually personally from me. As you have stated, ma'am, this is a social issue, and particularly each of us has a vital role. So the question, what can family do particularly parents or guardians in handling their child or children who are or who is clinically diagnosed with anxiety disorder and who has suicidal tendencies. If both of the parents are working abroad and the one who's taking care of their child is their relative.
Well, okay. So number one, when there is a mental illness involved, then that is very important that the families support the diagnosis and the medication that needs to be taken or analyzed to make sure it's the right kind of medication. And especially if the parents are not there and a relative is watching the child, it's just really important that the communication is very strong. But I think it starts first with families being open with their youth and talking about it. If we're seeing kids as young as 7 years old dying by suicide, if we're seeing that it's the number one cause for 13-year-old teenager girls, then we need to find a way that parents feel comfortable enough to start talking to their children. I ask parents, when did you talk to your child about sex? And hopefully they answer me with, between the ages of 12 to 14 or whatever. And then when did you talk about alcohol, driving with alcohol? And they tell me. And I'll tell you what, when I ask parents, when did you talk to your children about suicide? I have very, very little families talk about suicide. So I think it's the awareness of the families addressing it. And then if there is a mental health issue, then that in itself has to be very open with all the guardians and everybody involved.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for that advice. Another question coming from Lisa Niao, Mom Lisa Niao. It says here, how do we know suicide has become a contagion? Is there a parameter for that? I repeat, how do we know suicide has become a contagion? Is there a parameter for that?
How do we know if suicide has become a contagion? What is the word?
Contagion, ma'am. Or probably she wants to say contagious or it's widespreading.
Oh, okay. So suicide is not contagious, or even in families doesn't necessarily run in a family, although people are more susceptible depending on how that family has helped or how it reacted to a family member dying by suicide. So why it's becoming so widespread is because of the fact of the hopelessness in our environment and in our society, and our the positive protective factors that are being eliminated within our society. So going back to that balance wheel, all of those things really do determine someone's balance in life, from their spirituality to their education to their family, positive self-esteem. So all those factors come to play on finding out an individual how they can be not so prone to feeling hopeless.
Okay, ma'am, thank you so much. Another question from Ma'am Karen Gerland. It says here, if they say your child or student have suicidal tendencies, what does it mean and how shall we address it? I mean, how can we validate the tendency? Let me repeat the question. If they say your children or student have suicidal tendencies, what does it mean and how shall we address it? I mean, how can we validate the tendency?
Well, it's all about addressing it. So if they have tendencies, that means that they've demonstrated warning signs, they've demonstrated risk factors that are very obvious to either a psychologist, administrator, something like that. So how do we address that? We stay very aware of those warning signs, and if they increase, or if there's something that they have to be helped and work through these tendencies that they have. So no one who has suicide tendencies necessarily will die by suicide. And that is because the help that they continually get, and instead of being denied it, is where that they will be strengthened, and that it gets less and less. And I'm not talking about mental illness here. I'm talking about children, people that just have that hopelessness, the ones that I showed you, the pathway to suicide.
Another question, ma'am, that just came in from Sir Kenneth Pakipak. He was asking, if one person is undergoing suicidal tendencies and another person is also undergoing the same concern reached to this person, what approach can be best employed in this situation? Again,
Like,
if one person is undergoing suicidal tendencies and another person is likewise undergoing through the same concern reached to this person, what approach can be best employed in this situation?
so am I to assume that the one is trying to help the other?
I think they have the same concern of having that suicidal tendencies.
Okay, so somebody comes to that person and they're experiencing the same thing that person is experienced. Okay, well, okay. Well, even though I keep saying I know exactly how you feel, you don't say that. If you're listening to somebody and they're talking the same way you're talking, then the realization is you both need to get help. And how wonderful is that, reaching out and saying, we're not alone. Let's go get help.
Definitely, we all need that kind of help, especially these trying times that we're going through. So again, we are still encouraging our participants to ask questions to our speaker. Okay, another question, ma'am, from, okay, it was not mentioned, but this is the question. Should we hold mainstream or entertainment industry or any literary materials for using suicide as the central focus of their material? Should we consider it as bringing suicide into conversation, or should we consider it as plain romantic?
Well, I know that I know that media does not ever want to talk about suicide. So if this entertainment is to glorify
As the
suicide,
central focus?
what? I'm sorry.
We're
So we're
having
having
technical
technical
difficulty
difficulty
at the
at
moment.
the
Again,
moment.
ma'am,
Again, ma'am,
can you hear
can
me?
you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, loud and
Okay,
clear.
loud and clear.
Again, this is the
Again, this is
question.
the question.
Should we hold
Should we
mainstream
hold
or
or
entertainment
entertainment
or
industry
any
or
literary
any
materials
literary
for
materials
using
for using
suicide as
suicide
the
as
central
the
focus
central
of their
focus of
material?
their material?
Should we
Should
consider
we
it as bringing suicide
bring
into
suicide into
conversation, or should
conversation,
we
or should
consider
we
it as
consider
plain
it as plain
romanticization of
romanticization of self?
self-harm?
Hmm. Well, media in itself does not want to talk about suicide. And so the only time we really hear it is when entertainment uses it as a ploy for um, a movie or a document or something to that effect. So we do want to bring suicide out in the open. When you put light onto darkness, it always reveals the ugly side of anything. So when we have programs that romanticize suicide, that is wrong. But it's a great training. There was a show that came out, 13 Ways, I think it was called, where a teenager decided to die by suicide and wrote 13 letters to her classmates. And it was a terrible movie, but if parents would let their children watch it, they should have watched it with them to train them why it was a terrible movie. So entertainment has never been to benefit us, has it? Really, in any kind of situation?
Thank you
Oh,
so
I've
much, Ma'am Mindy, for answering that question. Again, we are still encouraging our participants to ask questions. We still have more time. I believe we can learn more when we engage in this kind of discussion actively. So, again, to our participants, our staffs, or anyone who is actually joining us in this webinar, you can comment down all your questions in our FB Live comment section. So, ma'am, while waiting for them, can you give us a personal advice based on your own personal experience? Have you have experienced um, counseling uh, teachers or students currently were into distance education, and our children or our students are into distance learning education, and with the isolation that they're going through, there are so much things that they're actually experiencing at home, and I think that causes them to have this mental and emotional burden. What can you give us, what can you advise to our students in these trying times?
So depending on what age group, parents need to be more involved than they've ever been involved before, and not discount the actions or the words their children are saying by just discounting it by saying they're just teenagers. That they need to be really informed and connected with their kids, closed doors, not seeing them for days. All that is really unacceptable. The parents need to stay involved, and our youth, our teens and our college kids, our students that really aren't at home and really are not accountable to anybody, find somebody that you're accountable to. When we just dwell on the negatives, we start listening to negative thoughts looping in our mind, and it's just, it becomes a very despairing. So have an accountable person, have somebody that you check on and they check on you. We are in this together. I heard this expression, but I don't see that. I see a lot of people feeling very alone and very isolated, and even Zoom is not the best, but it's at least something for us to reach out to one another. So don't give up. If you are starting to feel that way and feeling like, I don't see any purpose right now, um, find somebody that will help you find your purpose. Don't give up.
Thank you. Let me quote that once again. Do not give up. So thank you so much, Ma'am Mindy, for sharing your expertise. And I think that ends our open forum. So let me give the floor once again to our moderator, Sir JR. Back to you.
Bye.
Okay, so thank you very much, Ms. Lapus, and to our dear participants for participating on our open forum or question and answer portion. So moving on, let us listen to the chairperson of the Department of Social Sciences, Professor Maria Teresa Dulipas, as she delivers the synthesis for this event.
Okay, thank you, JR. So for today's activity is actually a product of the hashtag iGeneration Research Project that was spearheaded by Ma'am Carol Mina. The studies in the mentioned research project reveal that the iGeneration is facing aggravated mental health issues that lead some of them to resort to suicide. Ma'am Mindy, our resource speaker for today, further broadened our knowledge about suicide. She emphasized that suicide is not only a major health problem, It is also a form of violence. It is essential for us to detect warning signs of suicide, for us to be able to provide emotional first aid to the person with suicidal tendencies. And Ma'am Mindy made mention that this person who has suicidal tendencies could be someone dear to us. So the person could be a family member, a distant relative, a friend, a neighbor, or even a student of ours. She also remarked that every one of us has the privilege to help or save a person who has suicidal tendencies. That help that we can extend may come in the form of letting them realize that life is still good despite the challenges that we are facing. However, of course, we have to be mindful of the do's and don'ts of the suicide conversation, which was elaborated by Ma'am Mindy. She had also shared with us the practices of the law enforcement chaplain Sacramento with regards to suicide prevention, suicide intervention, as well as suicide postvention. If we are going to look into everything that has been discussed by ma'am, communication is the key component of all these best practices. So based on these concepts that were shared by Ma'am Mindy to us, it is hoped that we can also adopt measures that will enable us to help the I generation cope with the mental issues they are facing and eventually eradicate the thought of giving up on life. So again, in behalf of the Department of Social Sciences, thank you so much, Ma'am Mindy, for being our resource person or speaker for this activity. And to everyone who took their time to participate in this activity, thank you so much.
Okay, so there you are. Thank you very much, Professor Maria Teresa Dulipas, for that synthesis. And now let us also give time to our number one clients, the students, to give their response, starting with the President of Supreme Student Government, one of the Board of Regents of the university, and in the person of Honorable Chris Warren Lagman, to be followed by the representative of the university's official student publication, the Mountain Collegian, in the person of Miss Melody Gallup.
To our university administrators, faculty and staff, student leaders, and fellow students who are watching by Facebook Live, good morning.
To our speaker, Senior Chaplain Mindi Russel, the Executive Director of the Law Enforcement and Chaplaincy Sacramento, to her staff and LECS personnel, good evening.
People often focuses on the physical aspect, neglecting the unnoticed features which are the psychological and emotional pieces of life. Hence, this activity aims to uplift these features.
It is generally known that experience is the best teacher. But I was also told that experience is the worst teacher. In life, we go through adversities and unique challenges, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. That is when developmental learning comes in. If experience is the worst teacher, the best teacher is the experience of other people. We learn from their best practices. We learn from their mistakes. We sustain and adopt the good ones, and we disregard the negative ones. On behalf of the Supreme Student Government, the High Council of Student Leaders,
And the Mountain Collegian,
we support the development and implementation of mental health policies and programs that will benefit the university employees and students.
also such activities that will contribute to the health and well-being of the community as a whole.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Lagman and Miss Gallup. And now, may we also hear a message from the representative of Master of Arts in Social Studies Students Association and the person of Miss May Angeline Lapus.
Once again, congratulations to our resource speaker, Ma'am Mindi Russel, who despite time and space shared her experience and expertise in enlightening us with the best practices on how to address suicide. As this is a social issue, particularly to how to prevent this, what are the interventions and the postvention that we can do. Thus, we would like to award this certificate of appreciation. This certificate of appreciation is awarded to Ma'am Mindi Russel for serving as a resource speaker and for imparting her valuable insights and inspirations in the online international webinar on towards institutionalizing policy on Gen Z mental health protocols, held December 16 to 17, 2020 via Zoom, given this 16th day of December 2020, La Trinidad Benguet, 2601 Philippines, signed by our university president, Dr. Felipe Salaing Comila. Congratulations, ma'am. May we give ma'am a virtual round of applause? Okay, congratulations. Ma'am, we have learned so much and our hopes are high to apply these practices to those people who might be needing this. And let me quote what you have said. Let them feel that they are not alone and they are important. Likewise, our sincerest gratitude to our participants who actively engaged and joined us in this webinar. Indeed, each of us has a vital role to do in addressing this social issue in our own homes, workplaces, and community. Again, ma'am and sir, you are not alone and we are all together in this in addressing this social issue. Thank you so much and God bless you all.
Okay, so thank you very much, Miss Lapus. And now to temporarily end the first day of our webinar series, may I call on Miss Marisa Parao, the Director of International Relations Office, to give us a short message. Okay, so while waiting for our Director of the International Relations Office, I would like to remind everyone that this webinar has a second day or have a continuation tomorrow, scheduled tomorrow, December 17, 2020. It will start at 8 a.m. in the morning and will end at about 12 in the afternoon. We will be having two resource speakers for tomorrow's event. Ms. Aurora Parcasio, guidance specialist from the University of the Philippines, Baguio, and Ms. Marie Elame Refuerzo from the Department of Psychology from St. Louis University, Baguio. Okay, so there you are. Ms. Parao is already in. So let us hear her message.
Good day to everyone.
Nowadays, teachers have experienced global pandemic and technological challenges. And so the introduction of new technologies in the education system has not only affected teachers, but most especially our students, the Gen Z generation. Now, imagine the constriction brought by this pandemic to these students who are lively, outgoing. And so, with this, we wanted to address these issues so that teachers' role will be more magnified. Thanks to the Department of Social Sciences of CAS, to Ms. Nina of iGen Research, and the Institute of Social Research and Development by Ms. De La Cruz, who initiated this activity, which is a welcome intervention to help our students cope with the mental stress and depression brought by this pandemic. So we hope that these exchanges on best practices in mental health will also innovate our approaches in the institution in addressing the needs of our faculty, student, and staff alike. This is a great success. In behalf of Benguet State University, our sincerest gratitude to Dr. Mindi Russel, the fellow senior chaplain of Sacramento in US. And thank you as well to the faculty and staff of BSU, as well as our guests from the Mental Health Office of Baguio and Youth Force Philippines, from St. Louis University and UP Baguio, who also share their expertise and time. To all those participants in these events, thank you. Peace and grace to all.
Okay, so thank you very much, Miss Marisa Parra, for that closing message. And now, in behalf of the Benguet State University Institute of Social Research and Development, College of Arts and Sciences, Department of Social Sciences, the Office of the Student Services, International Relations Office, we would like to express our deepest gratitude to our resource speaker this morning, Ms. Mindi Russel from the Law Enforcement Chaplaincy of Sacramento, United States, for imparting us their best practices on mental health programs, which is very timely concern. It is extremely informative, and we appreciate you that you have allotted us a parcel of your most precious time. The participation of many has also illustrated the importance of the topic to everyone. And of course, to all our participants from different regions and different institutions, to all of our stakeholders, thank you very much. Thank you for making this event possible. But before we finally depart, I would like to remind again everyone that the second day of this webinar series will be scheduled tomorrow, December 17, 8 a.m. to 12 noon. And we'll be having two resource speakers for tomorrow's event, Ms. Aurora Percasio, a guidance specialist from the University of the Philippines, Baguio, and Ms. Marie Elame Refuerzo from the Department of Psychology of St. Louis University, Baguio. So there you are. Once again, I am John Ray Quines, and thank you. And we hope to see you again tomorrow for our second day of this webinar series. Have a good day, everyone.